What is going on, guys? So today I wanted to share something that I feel is really important to anybody who is looking to train with kettlebells or who is currently training with kettlebells exclusively. And the reason I wanted to share this is because it's a sentiment that I expressed on my Instagram page probably towards the end of last year. And if you have not followed me before or you don't know who I am, basically I built my entire personal training and coaching career off of being branded as the kettlebell coach, right? And I rebranded and shifted to focus more on incorporating all tools with my training. And when I expressed the reasons for that, a lot of the friends or the culture of kind of my following who were obsessed with kettlebell training did not really like what I had to say, right? And a lot of them unfollowed me, and it also led to me gaining a lot of new followers of people who felt the same way about kettlebell training in itself. And this video will probably put me even deeper into the bad books of those people who were really not enjoying what I had to say about kettlebells, but this is my belief and I am gonna honor my truth around this situation. And so I think this video is the best way for me to express some of the pros and some of the cons of training with kettlebells. So if you have followed me and my journey for a while, you will know that I built my branding being known as the kettlebell coach. That was my business name. And I trained out of this very room here in my house where I had the gym built. It was literally a pull-up bar and a shitload of kettlebells. And I was coaching clients out of this room for about 6 months and really getting my business off of the ground. I absolutely loved training with bells, right? I thought they were so unique, they were so different, they were training so many different movement qualities, and I actually couldn't understand why anyone would train with anything else whatsoever. I achieved some really amazing feats of strength with kettlebells. I bench pressed a 68 kilo bell, which in one arm, which was literally my body weight. I pressed a 48 kilo bell overhead. I did the chin up with a 48 kilo kettlebell attached to me at 68 kilo body weight. And I was just known as one of probably the most proficient coaches and kettlebell practitioners in the entire city. At that point, it's safe to say a lot of people were drawn to me because that's what I did, and kettlebells were really popular in the city of Liverpool at the time. And as you may well know, they're becoming very popular online too, just because they're super accessible, they're super easy to train with, and they almost feel functional because we can do so many different things with just one kettlebell, right? We can squat it, we can clean it, we can press it, we can swing it, we can do all these things with one bell, and we can chain them all together to create kind of like a complex or a superset or whatever. And that just feels really good, right? And I subsequently, after training with kettlebells for a good few years, flew to Chicago to get my Strong First SFG1 certification, and then became the fastest person to achieve both SFG1 and SFG2 rank. I did both of those within 28 days. So I did one in Chicago and one in Middlesbrough. I was fully indoctrinated with the kettlebell training ideology at this point in my life, right? And I suppose I was meant to be, because that's the whole idea of a fitness cult, right? And I am calling kettlebell training a fitness cult, and that's not really a derogatory term. I think sometimes it's great to be in a fitness cult. It's absolutely fine. It gives you a sense of belonging. Everyone's doing kind of the same thing as you, and you can all kind of share tips and ideas across that. But I felt that it had gotten to a point for me, particularly with my training and with being part of it, that people within this kettlebell cult were not just pro kettlebell, but anti everything else. And I think that whole methodology started to sit a little bit weird with me when I first joined another gym, because what you've got to realize is I was the kettlebell coach. I was coaching people in this room, and they did everything with kettlebells, and they looked to me as the authority in kettlebell training. It wasn't until I joined another gym where everyone else was in way better shape than me, and were lifting barbells and dumbbells, and they were using machines and cables and absolutely everything else, that I started to maybe question whether kettlebell exclusive training was the right path for me and was the right path for my clients. And I was in this echo chamber of kettlebell this, kettlebell that, it's functional, everything else is bad for you, and it's going to hurt your joints, and it's going to do this and going to do that. And there was a bit of confirmation bias there for me, because I had herniated the disc doing a barbell deadlift when I was 18. Didn't really realise that at the time it was just really poor load management, and I was like, yep, barbells fuck it up. I've never had a problem or an injury at all with kettlebells. This must be correct, right? And this video is not for me to shit on kettlebell training. For one, I think it's one of the best all-round fitness tools you can buy, and I think if kettlebell training is the difference between you not training at all or you actually getting some movement in and challenging yourself and your body, I think absolutely perfect. Go for it. It was my introduction to fitness, and it got me really, really, really strong, particularly for my body weight. So I do owe a lot to kettlebell training. It built me business, and it also helped build a really good foundation of strength. And I also made a lot of friends through the kettlebell community. Unfortunately for me, kettlebell training and my love for it was actually getting in the way of my results. And I say this not as someone who was completely physique obsessed, because for what it's worth, I think enjoying your training is super, super important. But one of the main reasons for why I was training was to look better. And I was taking progress pictures every single week, and I compared a picture that I'd taken 12 months ago to one that I'd taken like really, really recently at the time. And when I put those two next to each other, there was literally no difference whatsoever, okay? I had been eating in a slight calorie surplus. You don't need a massive surplus to build muscle. We all know that now. There's a lot of science on that. But nothing was really changing. And I actually couldn't see why until I really started to delve into the specifics of what builds muscle, right? And so I'm going to break down to you kind of the 4 things that I would consider before either engaging in a kettlebell only routine or continuing on with your kettlebell only routine, okay? I've had a lot of clients who have come to me who have trained in, like, say, online subscription services where it's all just kettlebell based programming, and lots of them come to me and they're like, listen, fuck all has changed. Like, literally nothing's changed at all. Yeah, I've got a little bit fitter, granted, I've got a little bit stronger, but that's just a byproduct of doing something, right? But their physiques weren't changing, and the amount of people I've had in from kettlebell kind of based routines who will then come to me and ask for something that's a little bit more nuanced is unbelievable. The first thing I'm going to share is this, right? The mechanism behind building muscle is progressive overload. And with kettlebell training, you can very, very rarely train to actual failure or anywhere near close. You are always limited by one of 3 things, right? Number 1 is your grip strength. You can't really use lifting straps for the majority of kettlebell training because it's dynamic, so you're doing things like cleans and presses and stuff. It just wouldn't really feel right for you to use a strap. And so you're limited as to how much weight you can hold on to. Number 2 is the size of the bell dynamics, right? This is really important, and it become very prominent for me. So when I was lifting, my overhead press was really strong, right? I could press a 40 kilo kettlebell for like 8 to 10 reps. But the reality was that it was really difficult as the bell got bigger, because it will completely change the positioning on your hand. And as bells get bigger, it completely changes the setup for progressive overload, because the lift is different, right? If you've got an 8 kilo kettlebell there, or you've got a 40 kilo kettlebell there, the way you have to press and contort your body around that bell is different. And some people like that because they think it teaches them to be strong in awkward positions. And that's fine, that's a perfectly valid point. But it got to the point for me where I couldn't continue increasing the load on my presses because it would really hurt my lower back on one side, because there had to be a lot of excessive leaning to keep the kettlebell over the center of mass. And I just don't really feel like that was conducive to me being productive in my training. The third limiting factor is your cardiovascular system. This is really important, right? When you're training with kettlebells, a lot of the time it's complex based stuff, right? Or it's EMOMs or it's AMRAPs. And so you're limited by your cardio system. Absolutely, that's not a bad thing in all cases, okay? It just means that you are going to have to get a little bit fitter, or you are getting a little bit fitter by performing these complexes or whatever it is that you might be doing, these EMOMs, these AMRAPs. And I do think they're a great conditioning tool. But for me at the time, I was running already. I don't really feel like I needed the kettlebells for conditioning. That wasn't really one of my goals. My goal was to get bigger and to get stronger, okay? And the kettlebell training was only kind of satisfying one of those. The second point that I think a lot of people contend with in the kettlebell world is this, right? You're limited to the kettlebells that you own or that your gym owns. If you've been to any commercial gym, you'll know how shit the selection of kettlebells is. It's so poor. You'll get maybe a 124 kilo. In some good gyms, it might go up to a 32 or like 232s or whatever. But for the majority of gyms, your selection is really poor. And if you don't already own a lot of kettlebells, and I'm talking some really heavy ones as well, every time you kind of outstrength, say, a certain weight, say you want to progress to the next weight. If I own 224 kilo kettlebells and I've been squatting with them, for me to progress to 228 is going to cost me £150. I might be too strong for them in a few weeks. The next set of bells up might cost me £180, the next set £210, particularly with things like a goblet squat, where I was squatting a 60 kilo for reps really easily. It would have cost me about £250 just to buy the next bell so that I could do maybe 1 or 2 movements with it. That is the definition of inefficient. And I think if you want to train and you want to be consistent with training, you need to lower the barriers to entry. And one of the highest barriers to entry for anyone with fitness is cost and space, okay? You're not going to have a shitload of space in your house unless you're really well off for you to be just having 60 kilo, 68 kilo kettlebells lying around. It just becomes an incredibly financially inefficient way of training when you think that you can go and subscribe to a gym for £20 per month and you can have access to all of their equipment that is all regularly maintained, and there's a huge variety of it, including cardio tools as well. So the financial viability of kettlebell training for me was a big limiting factor. Number 3 is you can only get so strong, right? And I say this kind of in conjunction with number 2, because let's take a squat, for example, right? I could goblet squat a 60 kilo kettlebell for 17 reps, but the second I tried to get an 80 kilo kettlebell into position, number 1, it's highly fatiguing to actually get that up and find the right position. And number 2, my core is going to fail me within 2 or 3 reps with just 80 kilo, okay? I can jump under a bar and barbell squat 100 kilo for 10 reps easily. I can then load the bar up with more plates. It's incremental, it's much easier. It costs me a lot less money. And what do you think is going to provide the better stimulus for you, okay? Is it moving up to the next bell and sacrificing maybe like 80% of your reps or whatever because you simply just don't have the grip strength or the forearm strength to keep it in position? Or is it being able to slap an extra 1 or 2 kilo onto a bar and have your form pretty much completely the same, standardized, but for you to be progressively overloading? There's a reason why we have so many tools available in a gym, okay? It's because it wants to make life easier for us to actually progress. We know the progressive overload occurs with literally a 0.5 kilo increase in weight. It can occur with 1 extra rep, okay? But when you're limited as to how many kettlebells you do have or that your gym has, the only real way for you to progress is adding more and more volume with that weight. And as you know, that's highly fatiguing, and it's also highly consequential in terms of the rest of your workout because you're just adding more fatigue to the central nervous system. Stuff like kettlebell training requires a lot of co-contractions in the body. Co-contractions are fatiguing, so if you are trying to bring up a certain body part, but you know that the rest of your body is having to work extremely hard just to stabilize yourself against that lift, it's not going to be the most efficient way for you to train. It's actually probably going to start becoming a little bit detrimental to you. The 4th point I've got is accessory work is so much more awkward. I don't give a fuck what anyone says about you can curl a kettlebell. Curling a kettlebell feels shit, okay? You can barely feel it in the biceps. It's pretty much all forearm work. And again, you really are limited as to what you can hold on to. I would find it impossible to curl a 32 kilo kettlebell, but I can comfortably curl a 40 kilo bar or 220 kilo dumbbells, and I can feel it a lot more in the biceps as opposed to me core and everything else just fighting really hard just to squeeze onto this one kettlebell. Accessory work is super difficult to do with kettlebells, and all the kettlebell practitioners will say to you, you don't need to do accessories, you can do cleans for your biceps and you can do whatever else that they want to do. A clean is never going to build your biceps. It's simply not, because it doesn't take us through any of the mechanisms that cause muscle growth. It just doesn't, okay? So beyond beginner gains, you're not going to see any real benefit from that whatsoever. Again, this is why we've got tools in the gym that are better suited to certain things. Obviously, a preacher curl machine is going to be a much better option for you than putting a towel through a kettlebell and doing towel kettlebell curls. It just is. The whole reason that I kind of turn my back on kettlebell training as a modality and not as a tool, so let's not like get it twisted, I still use them as a tool. For some people, a goblet squat's a great option. I still use them when I'm doing Bulgarian split squats, or I'll use them when I'm doing bent over rows or anything like that, because it just feels a little bit more ergonomic. But the reason I switched up on that methodology of kettlebell training is because what we need to follow when we are training are principles, okay? And certain tools help us apply principles a lot more efficiently than others, like a preacher curl machine versus a kettlebell curl, okay? And to be ignorant of all the other equipment you have available to you, that is going to be much more beneficial. It's going to save you a lot of fatigue, and it's going to save you a lot of money, just because you are indoctrinated into a cult of a certain exercise, I think is just foolish. And I think one of the most important qualities a coach can have is to be able to change the mind when new information comes to light, or when they become enlightened in a certain topic. In this case, I did. It cost me a lot of me following. It cost me a lot of clients who wanted to train exclusively with kettlebells from home, who I just stopped training because I no longer believed in that methodology for getting results. But I didn't really care, because it wasn't aligned with who I was. And now my training methodology is pretty much going with heavy load for lowish reps, talking kind of like under the 10 rep region. And the results we're getting are absolutely insane, right? And people as a coach don't pay you for novelty. They might think they do, but in reality, they will get pretty fucking bored if they're not getting results. When I was training people with kettlebells, they were getting some results, but they were all largely linked to fat loss and not really anything to do with muscle building. So switching to full range of motion, 3 to 4 day splits that used every tool helped me completely blow up, okay? I moved away from the idea of don't use machines, become one, because I thought it was a pretty stupid sentiment anyway. But a lot of the kettlebell community absolutely loved that idea. Like it was a bad thing, right? I even spoke to one of my former instructors, who was like the lead instructor of one of the certifications I did. And I put a post up, and she kind of started a little bit of debate with me and was like, well, what do you think the problem is with kettlebell training, blah, blah, blah. And I just said, look, if I'm trying to train my chest, I think a chest press machine or a chest fly machine is a much more efficient option than me having to roll over onto one side, get a kettlebell in each hand and bring it up to my chest and lie on the floor and do a bridge and do a floor press where I'm limited as to how well I can hold onto the weight. And she kind of put back, don't even get me started. I would never use a machine. And that for me was it was the nail in the coffin as to like, all right, you guys really are completely like indoctrinated into this is the only way to train, because you're just so surrounded and engrossed in this idea of the kettlebell as the master tool. And I think that's not a great quality to have if you're a coach, okay? It's a great quality to have if you're a kettlebell coach, because you're just trying to indoctrinate everyone else. But yeah, for me, that was the nail in the coffin. So they're just some considerations, right? I do still think kettlebells are a really great tool for a beginner. I think they're a really great tool if you have no other option. Like if you have to train from home and you've really got a lack of funds, I think a kettlebell is a better purchase than a dumbbell. It takes up less space than a barbell. You're certainly not going to have a cable machine in the house. But I think that's kind of where it ends, right? Unless you're a strong man or you've got a ridiculous amount of money, ridiculous amount of space to be able to keep buying more and more bells, and you like making content with kettlebells, then I personally believe it's much, much better for you to just go and get a gym membership, get comfortable with driving 10 minutes to the gym and back, and having access to an array of tools. So that's this rant over, but I just thought I would give a little bit more insight as to me, my past, and kind of what led me down the route of training the way I do now.